Everybody, and welcome to the Legislative Preview. I'm Robert McCormick from KU Medical Center, and I'm the Legislative Chair for the NEJC Chamber this year. We're honored today to be joined by our state legislators who have agreed to come and share some of their thoughts on this upcoming session. Each legislator is going to have 5 minutes to present, and then we're going to have some time for Q&A at the end of those 5 minutes. I believe everybody's microphone is supposed to be muted, but if you could just double check and make sure it's muted for now. And then we can unmute when it comes time for questions. For our elected officials, I have a stopwatch. I know our friend Deb Settle likes to run on time. So when you hit the 5 minute mark, I'll hold up my hand and give you the stop sign. And if that doesn't work, I will try my best to interrupt you in the most polite way that I possibly can. I do want to take a second to acknowledge Patrick from Kansas Gas Service. They are the sponsor for our legislative series. So Patrick, I'll turn it over to you for a few words.
Hey, thank you, Robert, and hello to everyone. Welcome to the 2021 Legislative Preview. I am Patrick Vogelsberg. I'm Manager of Government Relations for Kansas Gas Service. It's great to see everyone. It's my hope that when we do the 2022 Legislative Preview that we will be with you all in person. But until then, we must remain vigilant. There is a lot of uncertainty to how the business of the legislature is going to be conducted. Plans are being developed right now, as I'm told, and maybe we'll find out some more information today. But it is certain that the constraints on the 2021 session will be like no other that we have seen. And to that, I want to say thank you to the elected representatives for your tireless efforts on behalf of Kansans. Like you, our employees strive to provide exceptional service consistent with our values. And I do want to take the opportunity for those of you that may know community members or have constituents that are struggling, please direct them to our CARES website for information about payment plans or financial assistance and other resources. And that's kansasgasservice.com/CARES. Our customer service team is working hard to reach out to customers who may be in need, to urge them to consider taking steps to claim whatever benefits may be still available under the CARES program before the programs close, as you all know. And furthermore, I just want to put a plug in for the Low-Income Energy Assistance Program. That window opens January 4th, and there's more information that's administered by the Department of Children and Families. So there's information on their website. So thanks again to the Chamber for this opportunity to sponsor and be a part of this important event. And I'll turn it back over to you, Robert.
Thank you so much, Patrick. We appreciate you, appreciate your support. Thanks so much. I did want to say, I believe this is being recorded today. Just wanted to let our elected officials know, so hopefully that's okay. Our speaker order is going to be just a little random today because I've been told that maybe Senator Pettey and Representative Xu need to make other engagements. So I think we're probably going to start with them if that's okay. So with that, I might go ahead and toss it over to Senator Pat Pettey, who represents the 6th Senate District. Senator?
Thank you, Robert. And I'm not going to keep this mask on, but I'm wearing it just as a reminder that even though I know Pfizer has been approved and we know it's going to be rolling out right away, we're going to be wearing these for the whole session. And I mean, I say that optimistically. I hope that my colleagues are wearing it for the whole session. Let's put it that way. Yes, I am on mental health modernization reform, and this is our last meeting day. I guess we could say one great thing that's come out of, if there's any great things that have come out of the COVID impact, is Zoom and meetings virtually. So we're all able to be together, and I'm supposed to be in Topeka, but I'm going to be doing it by Zoom. So I found that to be an advantage. Well, this is a really going to be a different year, as Patrick alluded to, for those of us that are in the legislature and those that work with the legislature, as far as access and availability. But at the same time, we do have modernization. It has pushed forward modernization for access. And so I know Representative Clayton has made that an issue that she's brought up repeatedly about accessibility and openness. And so we're going to see that being very much increased this year and improved. For us that are in the Senate, it's really going to be a different year. And one thing is that we've had a 38% turnover in representation, including both the leadership as president of the Senate and Susan Weigel, and as the minority leader in Anthony Hensley, which I think probably is a little, I'm not sure how far you'd have to go back to see that happening, that you have both the president and the minority leader. Well, Anthony was the minority leader for 24 years, so you definitely would have to go back 24 years to see both of those positions to be changed, and that is occurring, of course, in 2021. And the Democratic leadership, we have Dinah Sykes, who's the new minority leader from Lenexa, and Aletha Faust-Godot from Wichita, and who is the assistant minority leader, and myself as the whip. So we have a total woman slate on the Democratic side, and on the Republican side, we have a total male slate. And there couldn't be bigger differences probably between the representation that's on the Republican side and the Democratic side. But I'm hopeful that we can work together. At this time, I don't know my committee assignments for sure. There's still, there's a discussion about some changes in committee structure, and which will be interesting to see because, in the Senate, Ways and Means handles all of the budget priorities, but I'm hearing that that's possibly going to be some movement there, which could really have an impact on how we operate. There is an interest in, I know that's one of the things that's on the Northeast Johnson County Chamber's priorities is mental health, and I mentioned that I'm on that mental health committee. So there's a lot of interest in that. The source of funding is questionable. However, I do think that one of our objectives is to look at ways that some of the codes can be opened up so that we can access some funds that haven't been available to us in the past. There is no will for Medicaid expansion, so I'm not even sure that we'll even hear a bill, at least on the Senate side. There'll be one introduced, but the leadership tells you right now that there's no will for that. I will be chairing the Early Learning Caucus again for the legislature, and our priority, as it has been in the past, will be to help legislators see how us looking at impacting families early can have a better outcome and also save money for the state. Let's see, what else? I believe there also is going to be interest in impacting, even though elections went smoothly in Kansas, I do think that there's some will to see some changes in our election, which I'm not sure is necessarily progressive. I mean, Kansas offered our voters lots of options, and they took good advantage of that. So we'll have to stay tuned to that. I think I do want to thank Deb and the Northeast Johnson County Chamber for this opportunity. It's going to be a difficult session, and I look forward to having your impact and working with you. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator. Really appreciate your thoughts. I think now we're going to turn it over to Representative Rui Xu of the 25th House District.
Thanks, Robert. I totally agree with Senator Pettey. I think it's going to be a pretty tough couple of years for especially the people in our area and the values of kind of Northeast Johnson County. Not only are there fewer Democrats, the conservatives that are there are quite a bit more conservative in both chambers. So I would expect anything that the governor vetoed last year, as well as the constitutional amendment on abortion, those are all back on the table. from the comments of the new Senate president. I think it's pretty likely that we're going to see kind of return to like corporate tax cuts that got vetoed, and that veto got sustained last year. And that's going to be an immediate budget buster. I think the fiscal note on that was in the hundreds of millions initially. I know that a couple of others are better suited and to talk about this later. I just want to touch on education real quick. I think that we'll probably see a lot of school voucher type bills this year, especially with COVID kind of uprooting education, kind of redefining what it looks like. I think they're going to be very opportunistic with that. Also, like Senator Pettey, I serve on the Special Committee for Mental Health Modernization. And so I spent a lot of time this summer kind of brushing up on that and just listening in on the working groups and learning. I think this is one area where there is actually a lot of bipartisan support. And so I would anticipate, the report rolls out in the next couple of weeks. We're kind of nailing that down, the final report right now. But we spent a lot of time talking about just really nuts and bolts improvements like capacity building, workforce issues, prevention versus recovery, and the costs associated with that, and kind of just like data systems, the sexy stuff like data systems and how they interact with each other on the various levels of government and private and nonprofit enterprise. And so those recommendations will roll out. And then I think, a lot of the recommendations are very easy to implement and have high impact. We kind of graded all of these different things on two scales, right? How easy they are to implement and how impactful they are. And the first prioritization are the things that score high in both, right? And so we'll see a couple of those, I would imagine, in the next couple of years. Me personally, I think it's probably no surprise to any of you here that know me that I'm going to spend most of my time continuing the conversations I started on environment and climate-related issues. See what we can do on carbon farming. And really, I think there's a lot of momentum right now in terms of expanding residential and commercial solar here in Kansas. Over the last couple of years, 10 years, 15 years, we've done a great job on the wind front. But I think right now is where we really need to start pushing on solar. So on the residential front, I'll be watching the KCC rate study right now, the Evergy rate study. Right now, they're kind of pushing for a $35 minimum bill. It won't affect anybody whose bills tend to be more than $35, but it will if they spend less than $35 now. It will become a $35 minimum, which for me to pay for residential solar seems a little unfair. You're essentially shifting the burden onto the people who are probably already the poorest and using the least amount of energy and in the smallest houses. And so that seems discriminatory in another way to me, not on solar customers, but on the most vulnerable. So I'll be watching that, and hopefully the KCC will see it the same way I do. On the commercial solar part, I'm looking to introduce legislation to kind of help enable power purchase agreements here in the state. So that essentially is just an agreement with, like, for example, schools or hospitals or municipalities to enter into third-party agreements to put solar on their roofs. I think you guys might have heard a story about this at a school kind of in central or western Kansas. And it's a similar type of idea, just you enter a third-party agreement. And so this will kind of help enable those types of buildings and areas to get solar in a cheaper and more sustainable fashion as well. This is an area where I think there is kind of a weird coalition. There a lot of times there are very, pro-consumer choice people in the legislature who tend to be on this side. It does not fall really cleanly within party lines. And so when I introduced a couple bills last year, I had a lot of people that I didn't expect come up to me just being like, oh yeah, I can get down with, carbon farming. Can't talk about climate change quite as much, but if you talk about the environment in general, I think I can sway some people on my side. So really, especially while we're in the super minority, it's just about continuing the conversations, advancing the conversations on the issues that are important to us. And so I look forward to keep doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Appreciate it. I think we're going to go back over to the Senate and introduce the newest member of our delegation, Senator-elect Ethan Corson. Senator, welcome to the NEJC chamber, and we'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Long-time listener, first-time caller, so thank you. No, I really appreciate Deb and the Northeast Chamber for having this event. I'm going to jump right in. I'm going to try to knock through 3 issues real quick in my 5 minutes. The first is judicial selection. So as many of you know, in Kansas, our state Supreme Court justices are chosen through, we have a merit-based nonpartisan nomination process that's actually been enshrined in our state constitution since 1958. And this is where we have a 9-member Supreme Court nominating commission that reviews applications, conducts public interviews, and then recommends to the governor 3 candidates, and then the governor selects one of those to fill an open state Supreme Court vacancy. This has been generally nationally recognized as a good way of selecting justices, because whether we've had Democrat or Republican governors, the folks that have made it on the Supreme Court have generally been within the kind of the 40-yard lines on judicial philosophy. And most importantly, they've been regarded as just really good, smart lawyers, which to my mind are the kind of folks that you want to have on your state's highest court. So I think the process is working. Unfortunately, Ty Masterson, the incoming Senate president, this has been one of his longstanding issues. And he wants to change the judicial selection process to mirror the federal Supreme Court selection process, where the president obviously nominates Supreme Court justices and then they're subject to confirmation by the Senate. Because this is a constitutional issue, it would require amending our state's constitution. So that would be a 2/3 vote in both the House and the Senate, and then a majority vote on a statewide ballot to change that judicial selection process. And I do think that we will see action, at least on the Senate side, on this issue this coming session. The second issue I wanted to talk about is COVID-19 liability protections for businesses, which I think is of particular interest to this audience. You'll recall that during the summer special session, there was a law passed that provided that a business was immune from civil liability on a COVID-19 claim if the business was in substantial compliance with applicable public health directives. And to me, that was a reasonable kind of fair middle ground for where we should be. The challenge is that this law expires on January 26th, and we don't start session until January 11th. So this is going to be an issue that we'll need to address almost right out of the gate. My hope would be that we could extend this law for a full year so we won't have to keep revisiting this issue repeatedly. And then lastly, I want to talk about the budget quickly, because that affects so many other issues, whether it's education, taxes, transportation, infrastructure. So Kansas, we receive consensus revenue forecast twice a year, once in April, once in November. So we just received the November forecast a couple weeks ago, and that was actually fairly encouraging. So what they forecast is that we will end this fiscal year, which ends in June of 2021, with a $363 million budget surplus, and that we were projected to end the fiscal year that ends in June of 2022 with a $151 million deficit. And I think to really understand that forecast, you have to look back at what the April consensus forecast was, and that was a $700 million deficit for the fiscal year ending in June 2021, and a $1.4 billion deficit projected for the fiscal year that ending in June 2022. So this is a marked improvement. We are not out of the woods yet by any means, but I do think we are in a position where we'll have the revenues to continue funding schools, to continue providing services for the most vulnerable Kansans. And this is not a time where we'll have to enact draconian budget cuts. But at the same time, we are not out of the woods yet. There still is significant uncertainty in our budget picture because we don't know how long this pandemic will last, and we don't know how long it will continue to impact our economy. So I would argue that we should be patient. We should let the revenue picture stabilize, and we should not make any significant changes to our tax code during this period. That said, Senate President Masterson has signaled, as Representative Xu mentioned, that he intends to push forward a package of tax cuts, which I think is irresponsible because we are not in a position because of the pandemic to understand the medium and long-term budgetary impacts of any of these changes to our tax code. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator, for sharing your thoughts. Really appreciate it. I think now we're going to jump over to the 21st House District. Representative Jerry Stogsdill, floor is yours.
Thank you. It's always good to be at the Northeast Johnson County breakfast meeting. I wish there was a little more breakfast this morning, but hopefully next year. But I served the 21st District, which is mostly Prairie Village, parts of Overland Park, Leawood, and Mission Hills. I'm going into my third term, and last 2 years I've served on Tax Committee, Education, Federal and State Affairs. I've requested those same committees again this year, and if they are back in play, I'm assuming that I'll probably be assigned to those again. I wanted to talk a bit about education because obviously it's been highly impacted over this past year. And there's three things that I think I really need to focus on education this year. One is, we have asked our teachers to do unbelievable work this year. I mean, they have gone back in the classrooms when school districts have required them to go back in the classrooms in some conditions that are definitely not healthy. They have put themselves and their families at risk for this. And I absolutely think they have done heroes work all across the state of Kansas. And for the last 4 years, I have had a bill in the Education Committee. I've gotten it through the House twice. It has not gotten through the Senate. But in 2014, due process rights were just ripped away from teachers in the middle of the night, literally in the middle of the night. No committee meeting, no hearing, no discussion, nothing. And all that bill says is that a teacher cannot be fired for unjust reasons. And I think if we can't pass that bill this year, I don't know how we recruit teachers into the state of Kansas, because after all they've done for us, all they've done for our kids, all they've done for our communities and so on, if we can't even guarantee them that they will not be terminated for unjust cause, I don't know where we go from there. But that's going to be on the agenda day one for me on the Education Committee, and we've never even been granted a hearing in the Education Committee on this issue, let alone a vote. I've had to get it passed through the House twice by amendment onto another bill, but I'm going to be pushing that again. Second thing is school funding. I think we all know that our friends across the aisle are probably again going to be looking at trying to cut the school budget or the school finance budget for the state. I think that is a gigantic mistake. That is the biggest economic stimulus package that we have coming out of the state of Kansas. That money goes to every city, every town, every county, all across the state. And that we've always talked about this wrong, in my opinion. It's like we put money into education. We should be talking about how it goes into education and then it goes out into our communities, into our stores and movie theaters and automobile dealerships and so on like that. You start cutting the money to those teachers and principals and custodians and bus drivers, and that's money you take right out of those communities. And I think it's going to be more important than ever to get that money into our communities as we come out of this pandemic. And so I would be absolutely against any cuts to funding in education. The third one I'd like to talk about real quick is kind of a new idea. I proposed 2 gun bills in the last session. One would added a 5% sales tax to the sale of guns and ammunition in Kansas, and all that money would have gone to upgrading our mental health programs and facilities. That didn't pass, obviously. The second one was to eliminate high-capacity magazines and handguns. That didn't go anywhere, but I think maybe the feds are actually going to take care of that this year. That bill, I know, is going to be a federal issue this year as well. But I'd like to have us start exploring the idea of adding some type of conflict resolution curriculum in our schools. that I've talked to several people in mental health issues and the mental health industry and so on like that, and they have said, you know, if we had something like that in our schools where we started talking to kids in kindergarten going all the way through high school, how do you handle conflict instead of just immediately reaching for a gun? And I think if we had at least to start that discussion on how we could enter that into our school curriculum, I think it would be a real advantage both to our kids in school on how to deal with that sort of thing, and it would also maybe be some kind of solution to lowering gun violence in Kansas. So I'm going to be pushing for trying to at least get some type of a pilot program or some money where we can study that issue and see if it might be something that we want to pursue. I was just looking at tax. I always supported it was House Bill 2345, and Stephanie and I have both been on tax, and we both supported this issue of giving a floating mill levy. And we can talk about that maybe more if you have questions, but thank you.
Thanks, Representative. Now we're going to go to Representative Jarrod Ousley from the 24th House District.
So I guess I'll turn my camera back on and my microphone. Sorry, guys, we had competing Zoom meetings here this morning, so you got to deal with my phone. I'm hoping I'm not giving anybody motion sickness as the tripod for the phone is mounted to the kids' piano, as they've been getting their lessons virtually since March. So bear with me. I can't say that it's nice to have an attorney amongst the Northeast Chamber or the Northeast Johnson County delegation. Longtime listener, first-time caller, bringing up the judicial appointments, because I believe it was in 2015 they attempted that and didn't have the votes. But what they did do was they moved our appellate justices to the presidential or the federal model, as they like to call it. But they got away from the merit system. So I'm not surprised to see that coming back on the radar. I think the other constitutional amendment had been more so on my radar, but yeah, we'll see if they have the numbers. It's kind of hard to give you all a prediction right now. None of us knowing our committee assignments, none of us knowing what committees there are. Last time I walked out of the State House, I was walking out with the chief clerk of the House chamber, and she said there had been discussions of, shrinking the membership of committees, as well as maybe combining some committees and whatnot. As I know, they're working overtime in the State House to move committee rooms to virtual committee rooms. By the time we get back there in January, there should be, monitors everywhere. And when we do get our new laptops issued, I'm sure they'll be capable to Zoom in or whatnot, from our offices. I actually was texting with a local leader here this morning whose parents are in rural Kansas, and she brought up the concern that, counties that haven't been impacted so much as maybe Johnson County or Wyandotte County, and those legislators coming in not thinking that this is as severe as it is and as impactful as it is, and maybe not adapting to the, safety protocol as easy. And with the legislature being exempt from any executive order, requiring masks or whatnot, I'm really curious to see what kind of session we're actually walking into. And I hope that colleagues will take it seriously, because if the Capitol building was to become a hot spot and then we were to go on spring break and everybody go back home, that could be devastating for the state as a whole. So we'll see how quick the vaccine rolls out, and we'll see how the, members cooperate. That being said, I've been the ranking member on children and seniors for the last 4 years, and I've still got work to do there. Actually messaging with the senator this morning as well about getting some Senate support upon establishing the Office of the Child Advocate. I'm sure I spoke with you all about that a little while ago, but the St. Francis story that just broke, I think, demonstrates the need for greater oversight. I've always called for deprivatization of our foster care system. Everybody says we need more oversight, more authority, and more transparency. And the St. Francis story just breaking that, the financial mismanagement of the outfit and how that's going to impact kids and whatnot. There's no transparency there because it's a contractor. It's not a state department, and if If that had been within a State Department, we'd be able to go back and get all the records, and transactions just immediately. So if there's no appetite to bring back our foster care system in-house to the State Department charged with the custodianship of kids in state care, then maybe we can at least get office specifically tasked with oversight of those kids. And then Jerry touched on gun bills. I had introduced last year and was trying to make progress, working out some kinks on what's been coined as a volunteer red flag act, and it would simply be to allow an individual to request they be put on a no-buy list in an effort to. My son's walking in, so I apologize if this gets loud. In an attempt to reduce suicide by gunfire, in a whimsical or depressive state. And actually, I'd be up for suggestions if we have time in the comments. The revisor I'm working with just asked me what I wanted to name that law. And like I say, it's kind of been coined the Volunteer Red Flag Act, but red flag is a non-starter for a lot of people in the State House when you start talking about guns and laws. So if anybody has any ideas of a better name for that, maybe a little bit more to the point, I'm all ears. So good morning, and thank you, Chamber, for having us.
Thanks, Representative. Appreciate you being here. I think now we bring in the closer, Representative Stephanie Clayton from the 19th House District.
Good morning, everyone. It's really nice to see all of you. I've been isolating a little bit. Per the earlier discussion of a lot of my colleagues, the legislators are not subject to a lot of the mask orders. And so as a member of the Economic Recovery Committee, the majority of the people on that committee do not mask. And so after being around them, I kind of keep myself close at home so that I don't, bring anything back and cause any closures or issues with your businesses or with schools. So want to go ahead and touch on some of the things that were discussed earlier. I am currently a member of the Federal and State Affairs Committee, Education Committee, and Tax Committee. Representative Stogsdill and I spend a lot of time together. We're committee twins. I don't know how much that will change, but we definitely, I do think we will see some massive changes coming up in committee spots. And this is primarily because there will be an attempt to appear magnanimous on the part of the Speaker of the House and the Senate President, but in reality, by reducing the size of committees, instead of delaying the start time of the legislature, they can say that they are reducing our exposure to COVID while not having to enforce masks and while keeping committees smaller so that certain members are on committees and certain members are not. So understand what is really going on with the subtext of that and just kind of conduct yourselves accordingly as we move forward. The interim committee that I've spent a lot of time on is the Committee on Economic Recovery. And so one of the things that I want to talk about as far as economics is concerned is that when we experience a decline, that is, we've heard that phrase, we're all in this together, and declines are actually the great equalizer. So when we experienced that economic decline earlier, back in March and in April, we all fell. But recoveries are not equal. Many of us are fortunate enough to, to be recovering just fine. Dow's looking great, stocks are looking great, but recovery is not really an equalizer, right? We talk a lot about, that K-shaped recovery. And the way that looks is that people who are, are essential workers, are hourly employees, those folks are still experiencing a lot of pain. A lot of small business owners, again, this is incredibly difficult. We're seeing a loss of a lot of restaurants, and especially we're seeing a lot of trouble for, for people I guess I think about this a lot because this is how I got through college, but people who wait tables. If you've gone to restaurants, you're going to see that not a lot of people are going out, yet you still have a similar amount of staff not making the same amount of money. So when we look at things like recovery, what we rely on a lot is what the federal government does. And so if you remember, we had a little bit of an economic bump back in July, and this was due to first the stimulus checks that all of us got, but also that extra $600 that was being given to people who were experiencing unemployment. There's been a lot of anger about that extra money, saying, well, gosh, these people are making more money unemployed than they were employed. But that money especially went directly into the economy, directly to our small businesses. And so for me, I looked at that thinking, you know, I might have socked my stimulus money away in the savings account, but people who have to spend the money right away, that extra $600 was a valuable stimulus to our local economy. I don't think that we'll see anything like that coming back. But hopefully we will start seeing more assistance from the federal government in that regard. As we move forward into session, I think other important overarching elements that are at play here is the dynamic between the Senate and the House and the governor's office. I think, you know, we're going to see some legislation that a lot of us are not going to like, but most of the blocking will occur in the House. Right now, we have, there is a possibility of what I would call a functional coalition or a governing coalition between moderate Republicans, and yes, there are still some in there, and Democrats when it comes to some of the most egregious tax policy that comes through. And again, so this tax policy that's starting to come back, that has been mentioned by many others on this call this morning, we're going to see that come through. And this is the same stuff that has been vetoed. It's been pushed as the solution to economic recovery. It's not, guys, but it has been pushed as that in that committee. And I've also seen people campaigning on it as if people at the doors know or care what decoupling or guiltier repatriation is. You know, frankly, I don't know if a lot of us do. But in any case, so these are talking points from a state chamber, not from a local chamber that actually has, you know, business owners like you. So we'll see a lot of pushes for that. Again, that's an ultimate budget buster, but I do think that depending on what is in that bill, we won't necessarily see it pass. Senator-elect Corson mentioned earlier judicial selection changes. And again, we blocked that in the House, I want to say in 2016. And many of the people who voted no on that are still there and still don't like it. We've also got some attorneys on our side who are not likely to support that. So, you know, I never give away a vote count, but I do want to offer you all some reassurance that we will see some bad legislation come through, but it is not all going to come through. And so the House will be the stopgap for that. Another element coming into the House is that the Speaker has been brought up a couple of times as a potential gubernatorial candidate. And so that will sort of be ground zero for a lot of bills that will sort of be used as like a campaign talking point. So a lot of action there. Hopefully it will be good action. I have no idea where I am on time. I will start talking about economic issues and I won't be able to stop. So I'm going to go ahead and yield the rest of my time to the body. Oh, but one more thing. I'd like to congratulate Representative Xu on his election to Democratic leadership. He is now our policy chair. And so this is an exciting thing. So thanks a lot for having me this morning. Great to see you guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative. Really appreciate all of your thoughts. There's just a lot of information there to digest and think about. We have about 20 minutes left for questions. If anyone has questions for our delegation, feel free to unmute now and go ahead and ask.
Or you guys could just like awkwardly stare at us. Like, come on, I know you've got questions.
Thinking maybe everyone hasn't had enough coffee yet this morning, a little too early. There's got to be some good ones out there.
I'll jump in. Any comments about the redistricting that's going to be hitting us soon?
I'll go ahead and jump on this. Again, like this is something that happens every 10 years. This really does end up being a massive battleground. Those of you that remember redistricting 10 years ago, this kicked a lot of things to the courts, and those candidates in that election, I guess, yeah, Pat, you were there, and so was I. We found out the district lines 4 days, not even that, before the filing deadline hit. So we will be drawing the districts, the congressional districts. That means that we will be lobbied pretty heavily by our 4 Congress people, I would imagine. And of course, redistricting, there were a lot of legislators who tried to get us a nonpartisan redistricting commission because, talk about Fox guarding the chicken coop, right? I know exactly what I want my district to look like, which is why I shouldn't be drawing it or voting on it, right? But yet, that is the system that we have. So there you go. I do think that it is, going to have more of a conservative bent, but I also think that there are pretty decent chances that this might end up going to the courts. So this is sort of anybody's game. Usually we would have an interim committee on redistricting that would have already been formed at this point. And for whatever reason, we do not. So stay tuned.
We just had a couple questions come in from Molly Hayes on the chat. She said, on redistricting, do you expect it to be handled earlier or later in the session?
I'd say later.
I'd agree. Yeah.
I think we won't get the official numbers from the U.S. Census Bureau until I think March is, I believe, when we're supposed to get those. So I think we should be doing some preliminary work, but in terms of having the numbers that we'll be working with, it won't be until March.
Thank you.
And I guess I'll chime in real quick and just saying how I see the path ultimately playing out. And this is, my first time going through this, so I could be wrong. Sorry if you hear babies. Is that, the legislature draws the lines, right? The governor, if it's a bad map, will likely veto. And then ultimately, I think it's going to go down to the Supreme Court. And then that's going to determine, what kind of maps that we see, if they accept the legislature's courts or not. And so I think we have a lot of public comments from previous Republican leadership that shows their intent if it is a bad map. And so I think that Senate President Weigel's comments could end up helping ensure fair maps more than anything. That is kind of what I hope to see happen, I think.
Jarrod, did you have something to say? It looked like your screen lit up there for a second.
Yeah, I think that everybody in this organization needs to take a very close look at this because I think we want fair redistricting that really reflects the makeup of the entire state of Kansas. And if it's one-sided, that is not good for the people of Kansas. That's not good for business in Kansas. So I think that making sure that this redistricting process is fair and that if we have to go to the courts to do that, I think that's great. But this is going to be a huge issue that's going to impact the state and going to impact our businesses and our people for the next 10 years. So this is serious business.
Agreed. Thank you, Representative. The other part of Molly's question, a little bit of a turn here. Any specific mental health bills and issues you expect the legislature to address this year?
Yeah, I think there's a couple that I have no idea if they will, but they kind of make sense to me for immediate action. So in this special committee, one of the things that we talked about in terms of workforce was a reduction in the number of clinical supervision hours required. I think right now it's like 4,000. And just to ensure, workforce, I think that there's talk about reducing that down to 3,000 hours. I think there's some other stuff that we could do too, in terms of, we can look at reimbursement rates. An interesting idea that came up that I really like a lot is, I think we know that Senator Moran has been pushing for this 988 suicide prevention line. And that requires some funding, but I think the state has the authority to kind of expand the scope of that. And so if we have the ability to staff it and all that, I think we could make it just kind of a general mental health crisis line. And so I think that makes it much easier, you know, like, because right now, if somebody in my household had a mental health crisis, like, just off the top of my head, I have no idea who to call. I have no idea really what to do other than call 911. And I think there's been a lot of conversation over the last year, and like, is that the best method for that? Right. And so I think that 988 number, if expanded to just general mental health crisis, I think could help out a lot for us. That's really easy to remember, and gets the appropriate care out to these situations.
I would agree with Reese on both of those topics, because I think they it does for the 988, it does give us a way to have a funding source for particularly talking about suicide prevention, and that was a big topic that's been covered on the mental health committee. Another and I agree with the reduction of hours. We've seen that happen with social workers, and so I hope that that's an issue that moves forward. The other thing is that we will be putting forth something dealing with telehealth. I mean, we have one whole section dedicated to telehealth and the accessibility and the billing for that, so that there is a concern that you know, you have to have a brick and mortar, and if you aren't able to, when you do telehealth, have the same sort of capacity for billing, it does make it much more difficult to have the brick and mortar support. So that will be an issue there. Another thing that when it comes to prevention is being able to having centralized authority. We have a lot of agencies that deal with mental health issues, which we don't want to necessarily see them all move one place, but that there would be maybe a cabinet position, or at least a centralized authority who would be the lead on when it comes to mental health issues. And lastly, I would say being able to bill for early intervention for sessions or earlier with children, and so changing the billing code so that we can bill for that.
Yeah, I wanted to say something real quick about that. Every year I meet with my chief of police here in Prairie Village before the session starts to see if there's anything that he would like to see us address in the coming session. And every time I've met with our chief of police and asked him what would be their number one priority, he's told me the same thing. And I figured the first time I went and talked to him, probably more money and that sort of thing. But he said, I am not asking, I am begging you for more mental health beds. That if we come out and we have to address an issue where a person is obviously having a mental health problem, and if there's not a bed at Advent or KU Med, someplace like that, we have to take them to jail. We have no ability to take care and address their problems in jail. So if there's anything you can do to upgrade our mental health facilities and programs and so on, that would probably be our number one ask. That's where I came up with the idea for adding a 5% excise tax under the sale of guns and ammunition, because our friends across the aisle, who of course are pro-gun everything, they say we don't have a gun problem, we have a mental health problem. Well, this was an opportunity for them to address that. Take that 5% excise tax, put it on the sale of guns and ammunition, and use that to upgrade our mental health facilities and programs. When I introduced that bill, they wouldn't even give it a hearing. So I think, again, if you think that those kinds of maybe innovative ways to approach both mental health issues and reducing gun violence issues ought to at least have a conversation in Topeka, I would highly encourage you to contact the Republican leadership stuff and say, why aren't we at least discussing this? Why aren't we looking for maybe novel ways to address both gun violence and mental health issues, since that seems to be your opinion of what the problem is out there?
Thank you all.
There's a question in the chat about medical marijuana or marijuana in general. And I think there is an appetite for medical marijuana legislation, and so I wouldn't be surprised to see that move ahead. I'm never sure what can, especially with lots of changes going on, what can pass, but I think there's a lot of interest in medical marijuana.
I've seen a lot of the questions come up in the chat, and I'm just going to look at them from the bottom up. Okay, so to what Senator Pettey said regarding medical marijuana or medical cannabis, we're trying to call it by its scientific name. I think we will see momentum for that. We had that actually last session, and I expected to see it coming through the Federal and State Affairs Committee. So that shouldn't surprise me. My teenager just took my car keys. It's fine. Okay, sorry. Anyway, I'll get to Stoney's question in just a second here, because that's a little bit of reality here, right? But in any case, sports gambling, just saw that one coming up again, coming through the Federal and State Affairs Committee. Unfortunately, one of our biggest champions for sports betting, one of our people who had the best knowledge base, did not prevail in his primary. So you'll look to see Representative Stogsdill and myself and other committee members working with people on that. And then let's see, the tax lid. So one of the things about the tax lid is that there is a tax bill that will repeal the tax lid, but it will also put obligations in place on local governments to put in very expensive notifications anytime there are changes to local taxes. And so it's like, you know, we're hearing from League of Kansas Municipalities that this is not terrible, but it's also, you know, kind of follows a Utah model. And a lot of we had a conferee from Utah, former Speaker of the House, who basically like lied to us, like straight out lied to us in tax. So usually if someone's lying, it's probably a bad bill. Medicaid expansion, probably dead on arrival. And that is very disappointing. And so going back to education, virtual versus in person, you know, and in the question, Stoney, you mentioned that, you know, which side are you on? I've experienced all of it as a Shawnee Mission parent. I currently have an elementary student who is in person. I have a high schooler who is back to full virtual, and I've experienced both children in hybrid. You know, it's somewhat dismaying that, you know, that my child is participating in sports, because we still have that, but there is no in-person education. I do think I've spoken with my youngest child's teacher, who is also a constituent, and that teacher prefers in person. I think in elementary, we are able to keep students a little bit more contained. Kids know how to follow rules. It's like, you might not see a grown adult wearing a mask in the hardware store because, you know, they're freedoms, but you know what? My 10-year-old knows how to do it, and he'll still be wearing it when he rides his bike home. So I do think that elementary schools, for those who choose to send their kids there, I do think a virtual option is essential until we have full vaccinated, you know, until we've all got those antibodies, which will be a while. But so I think that virtual should be an option. I think that, you know, some kids it's just not as good. You know, think about the way that we as adults are kind of suffering in this more virtual landscape. I mean, this is nowhere near as good as talking to you guys in person. But conversely, it is on us to make sure that we're protecting our fellow human beings. And so I don't think that there will be long-lasting damage to our children, given the fact that they've had virtual school or hybrid for a couple of years. Well, hopefully only 1 year, but you know, honestly, I do think that if we work to, you know, continue crushing the curve, so to speak, that we need to go back to in-person lifestyle. I think we've realized that human beings need to be around other human beings, but, you know, without killing them. So there you go.
So, and I'll just chime in here. The other part about the in-person learning for the elementary school is our elementary schools are full. So in order for them to be safely distanced at school, they're having to run at like a 50% capacity so that they can have kids properly spaced while they're there in person. And what that means is they only get 2 days of educational instruction, while the other 50% that are going get 2 days of educational instruction. So there's there's a debate to be made upon what educational instruction they're getting via what method they're receiving their instruction from, whether it's virtual or in person. And I don't disagree that, you know, kids need kids and they need to be running around and we all need each other. But I was talking with Kyle Kessler, community mental health centers. And, you know, he made the comment to me that kids are resilient, you know, and I'm not claiming he's an expert, but it was good to have somebody from the field reassure a parent of an elementary, a middle school, and a high schooler all going through this together with a senior, my dad, living with us. So that's the thing. You have to have the virtual option because you don't know what those kids are going home to. And some of those kids may be going home to a lifestyle that never changed through the pandemic and absolutely bring it back to the classroom. Some of those kids may be going home to a vulnerable sibling, parent, or grandparent or other, you know, so it's a tough scale to weigh.
I'll just chime in. This is Senator Pettey. I would say, you know, earlier, Jerry said, you know, gave kudos to teachers. I'd give kudos to every school board and every school board president because they've been making those really tough decisions and not always happily, and they've had their lives threatened. And unfortunately, I have a colleague who said that her name is on the sheriff's list, and they patrol her neighborhood regularly just because she's the president of a school board, which is sad because they are not paid. They are elected, and they're making decisions for us. The other part is that we do know that the children and I represent a lot of the Kansas City, Kansas school district that are the low incomes are the most vulnerable. And let's just think about, let's take Reese right now when he mentioned his daughter and hearing her, and think about having a space to be able to have virtual learning when you have 4 siblings in your household and you have a 2-bedroom house with 1 bathroom. So that's created a lot of issues, but I do believe that every school district is making the best choices for the population that they represent, and that they are trying to move forward in the best manner that they can. And so when they remain virtual for the whole year, like Kansas City, Kansas did, they're making those choices based on numbers, on the COVID numbers, and also on the population. So if it's whether virtual or whether in person, I would be 100% wanting every child to be in person, but only when we have the safe environment that they can have and that they can provide, as Jarrod said, for their families that they're going home to.
I wanted to make a real quick comment on Medicaid expansion. I don't think there's been a more critical time in our history that we shouldn't be pressing on for Medicaid expansion. I've been on the phone for the last 2 days with hospital groups all across the state, getting their assessment of the continued need for Medicaid expansion. And I can tell you there's not a hospital group or a medical group in the state that still doesn't have that #1 on their list. And I'm trying to get information about, they don't have it yet compiled for 2020, but I was asking them, how much charity care do you guys give in a year for people who are uninsured? It was $21.7 million at Advent, just at the Advent here in Johnson County. It was $55 million at the KU Med Center, and that was for 2018 or 2019. I can't imagine what it's going to be for 2020. And we have passed up billions of dollars coming into our economy and circulating in our economy to support healthcare, create jobs, all of that sort of thing over the last 8 years. We would have, if we'd have passed it when it was first offered, we would have had all that money circulating in our economy. And right now, the same thing. We have people who have lost their insurance right and left, and yet what do you do if you're in that position? If you've got COVID symptoms and so on, and your choice is going to the hospital and maybe bankrupting your family for the next 10, 15 years, or staying at home and not getting that treated and maybe spreading it and that sort of thing. We need to give people that Medicaid expansion cover so that they feel comfortable in doing the right thing, and we can provide medical assistance for those folks. If we're not going to spend our state money on things like that, what are we going to be spending our money on? So I think Medicaid expansion, I think the chambers, I think everybody ought to really be pushing Republican leadership to bring that issue up.
So Jerry, Reese and I are going to be finishing up on a report on mental health modernization and reform today, and there's a debate whether the word Medicaid expansion will even be mentioned in that report. So, so just to give you, you know this, so that's why I can say for sure on the Senate side, it's DOA.
Yeah.
I really hate to jump in here and interrupt this, but we are right at time. We're right at 9 o'clock. So I want to thank our delegation for being here and sharing your thoughts with us. We are very fortunate to have such an accessible group of elected officials, and we really appreciate it. We wish you a productive and safe legislative session. To everyone else, wish we could have done this in person today, but maybe next time. Thanks for joining. Take care, stay healthy, and we'll see you again soon.